Since Adam and Eve, peace be upon them, relationships have always been a catalyst for building our faith. So the real question is, are you being held back? Lack of willpower and negative relationships have shackled many of us. It cannot be emphasized how much our friends, family and community can limit our horizons, prevent us uncovering our God-given potential. And so when we say Islam is a healing, are we learning Islam within a family context? Whether you plan to get married or on the verge of a divorce or want to level up your goals as a couple, the family program can be the turning point for everlasting relationships. Learn and cultivate thankfulness and forbearance mindsets to become a positive influence to yourself and others. Eventually, you will build a growth mindset that will leave you never looking back as you venture forward to a new life. The family program. Learn, heal, grow.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our podcast, powered by Project Barakah. Today's topic is obeying the husband. It's a controversial topic, and I say it's controversial because I think we live in an era where there's a negative connotation around obeying the husband, there's emotions around it, and I think that probably stems from the fact that there's been times within society, historically and even in current day, where women are perceived to have suffered in obeying their husband in a worldly sense, and the husband has had some gain or abused this in some way and had some gains in a worldly sense. However, I think in getting caught up in this to and fro of obeying or not obeying and the problems in obeying and not having problems in obeying and all of that, we seem to have forgotten in society where that stems from and what marriage actually is and why those things even exist. And I think to give this topic a bit of justice, I think we need to begin at the beginning of what a marriage actually is in the first place. So assalamu alaikum to you both. I think maybe I'll come to you to answer that question. What is a marriage?
I'd say first and foremost, it's about the love and respect needs to be there between this husband and wife, if that will be the foundation. But ultimately, I mean, we say it's half our deen, but if we take it a step further, making your goal to get to Jannah, isn't it? So if myself, if I'm not doing the actions that's going to get me to Jannah, what's the point of being in this marriage? Does that make sense? So working together in a partnership with your spouse to get to that ultimate goal and actually visualize that as a family unit, as a husband and wife, that you are going to attain that eternal peace because of what you're doing right now on earth.
Same question to you.
Reiterate what Shumi is saying, that the marriage, and Allah mentions this in Surah Rum, isn't it, that what is the marriage is actually built on mawadda wa rahma, isn't it? This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that that's the sort of the relationship is built on mawadda, which is love and affection, and rahma, which is compassion. And then Allah mentions, so that you may dwell in tranquility together. Yeah. So really, if we come back to the essence of the marriage, and the reason for the marriage is to live together in peace and harmony and tranquility. And in order to do that, there has to be that love and compassion from both sides, really, isn't it? So really, I think it's so important when we get married that we bring it back to that, because the discussion we're having about, making it just, obeying the husband, or why is it we have to do this for the husband, or why does the husband have to do this for the wife even? It could just become about rules.
Yeah.
Do you see? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He addresses us as human beings first, isn't it? If we look at this verse, Allah says He made you, isn't it, as as spouses, as partners for each other. And then He says, and He made between you love and compassion. Isn't it? It's not mentioned, okay, you're the husband, you have to do this for her. you know, she's the wife, she must obey you and she must do this for you. Do you see? The first thing that Allah mentions about the marriage is the love and the compassion that has to exist between you. These are emotions, isn't it? And then the reason why is so that you can have tranquility. So really, that tranquility, that sakina, is what we have to prioritize in the marriage. Yeah. So I think that's really important to have that foundation of, okay, I'm married now, and this is what I'm aiming for. This is what I'm trying to achieve within the marriage. You know, obviously we have the roles as well, but the whole purpose of the roles is, you know, for the tranquility to be achieved in the marriage.
There's like kind of this modern day thing, isn't there, on social media when people say someone, like a marriage is someone to do life with.
Yeah.
And I think when you think about it, even in a modern day term, what does that actually mean to do life with? You're not going to do life with someone lifelong if you're going to be kind of cat and dog and arguing and all of those things. It has to be with tranquility, right? Otherwise, why would you do life with someone that you really don't like and brings out the worst in you and you're constantly arguing? That's not doing life in what... You could still do life, but it's not doing life in the fullest, is it? It's not doing life with compassion and kindness and where you feel good and you're reaching your maximum kind of potential. And I think going back to what you were saying, the kind of overarching aim for all Muslims is to attain Jannah, right? And I kind of, there's a part of me that feels like marriage is a path you take, right? The fact that it's half your deen, I think it's a path that you take to get to that end result. And perhaps the kind of rules and stuff within the marriage is how you get there. Obeying those rules and not obeying those rules is essentially whether you reach that goal or not in some ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, the way I see it is that any relationship that you have, it has boundaries, right? Like
Yeah.
if you think about any other relationship you have with your parents, with your in-laws, with your friends, we always have like boundaries, right? And in a marriage, there has to be boundaries as well. Again, it's a relationship, isn't it? So between the husband and wife, there are certain boundaries that have to be. There's not sometimes we think, oh, because love is involved, that is a boundaryless relationship. Actually, a marriage is a boundaried relationship as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has actually defined these boundaries. So when we're talking about like the the relationship and the rulings there, and obviously one of the rules that we have is the obedience of the wife to the husband in certain areas. Again, that's a boundary, isn't it? And with the husband that he has to provide for, and that's his duty again to be the provider of the family. That's that boundary that has been set. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as our creator, He has given these these rulings and these boundaries in that relationship. You see, and when the boundaries are not there, that's when the discord happens, that's when the problems happen. Coming back to what you were saying about, the relationship is the half the deen again. Like sometimes there's sort of misconception that you just get married and that's it, half the deen is already completed. But really, it's about the effort and the things that you do within the marriage, isn't it? That actually make it that it's the half the deen is by fulfilling that, by actually seeking the reward in the marriage, in the relationship. So as spouses, and this applies to both the husband and the wife, I think mainly we're speaking about from the female perspective because we're women here, is that it's actually that you're in that relationship to seek reward, isn't it? Really, that should be the aim. And as Shumi said, that it's about being Jannah orientated, isn't it? That's your ultimate goal, which means that your mindset is always, okay, what are the things that I can do for my husband as a wife to seek Jannah? Yeah, and that's the
You raised an interesting point. There was this, I'm going slightly off topic here, but there was this an interesting lecture that I listened to about kind of kinship tie, on the subject of kinship ties and maintaining kinship ties. I think it might have been Omar Salman or something like that. But anyway, it's an online video, and it actually mentions, that when people talk about maintaining the ties, it's not talking about maintaining the ties when things are good and easy and comfortable, and actually there's very little effort or hardship on your part. The kinship ties, that specifically has been mentioned because when it gets hard, you still need to maintain it. Otherwise, and that's where the reward is, right? That despite what the situation is, despite how challenging that relationship might be, you still maintain those ties. And I think going back to what you were just saying now around the marriage, yes, it's half your deen, but that doesn't mean just because you're married that it's half your deen. It's through all of those things that even in hardship, even in difficulties, that you're still obeying your husband, sticking within the boundaries and those
Yeah.
sorts of things. I feel like that's what you're trying to say.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because when things are easy, is there really that need, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rules only come in devoid of, again, when there's no love and compassion there, isn't
Yeah.
it? Then you have to say, okay, now what's the ruling on this? But if love and compassion are involved, mawadda wa rahma, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the verse, and you know what marriage is about, when that's there, then both sides are going to be trying to accommodate each other, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, only the rules come in really when things are, there's something happening or there's a
Yeah.
difficult, then you have to say, okay, let's go back to the origin, which is, okay, what are the rulings based on what Allah has told us? You see, otherwise there isn't really a need. Like, I mean, in day-to-day life, you know, for most husbands and wives, they have like a dynamic, isn't it? Like, which is sort of unique to that specific couple, and it's within the bounds of the Sharia, of course, but really it works differently. So yes, the Sharia says that for certain things, like the wife has to seek permission from the husband to go out. But in day-to-day life, like usually the husband will give the wife a permission to
Yeah,
get out,
you're
go
not
out,
gonna
get on
ask
with
every
day-to-day
time
life.
you
Exactly,
step
isn't
out,
it? Like,
yeah.
imagine every time you went to drop the kids off to school, you had to say, I'm going to, you know, can I go to drop the kids off? Can I go and pick them up? It just wouldn't work, do you see? So in generally in life, we get on with things, and there's that general understanding between you. Like, my husband knows I need to go pick up the kids, or I need to go buy some milk or bread or whatever it is. And in general, he will, you know, give you
Would
that
I be
permission
fair
get
to
on with
say
life.
that some of these kind of the kind of position of like where you when you obey your husband, some of the boundaries
Yeah.
that we've mentioned, like, you know, seeking permission before you go out, seeking permission about who enters the house, would it be fair to say that actually these are there's a default of how you live your life, but this is in the exception where your husband says, I don't want this person come to the house, you have to obey that, or when he says you can't go here, that's when you have to obey. It's not that you have to seek his permission every time you step out, and in that way, like, you don't need to be asking him day to day.
My understanding of that would be, unless the husband said you need to seek my permission every time you're going out,
Yeah.
It's
then
it's
fine,
given, yeah, but it's not that just because you suddenly realise that you need to seek permission that you need to now ask him 30 times a day every time you step out to go and put the
Yeah.
rubbish out and, you know, go to the post box and all of those things. It doesn't have to work in that way, right? It is actually when he is communicating,
Yeah.
don't do this, that you need to obey it, right? You don't need to go and look for it.
Yeah, let's come back to, again, some of the sort of asls that we have of the relationship. So we know Allah says, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala nisa," that men are the protectors, the maintainers of the woman, isn't
Yeah.
it? So if we look at it from that, which is like, we know this is clear cut that this is the man's role, he's the protector of his family. So now if we're looking at, okay, why does the wife have to seek permission?
Yeah.
And especially like maybe day to day, like he knows, okay, at 9 a.m. she goes to drop the kids, and you know, 3:30 she's picking them up again. On Saturday she goes to her mum's house or whatever, and he knows that's her timetable.
Yeah.
So there's not really that sort of need for
Yeah.
her constantly. But then maybe one day at 8 p.m. she needs to suddenly go out for milk because she needs milk for breakfast, let's say, or something like that, and she might just say, you know, in general, she knows he's okay with her going, but as the protector, he should know where his wife is,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because in the case where something did go wrong, then at least he knows, okay, my
Yeah.
wife is out. So she might be like, oh, do you know what? It's 8 p.m., it's dark outside. I need to quickly just go to the corner shop and get, you know, a couple of pints of milk because we need it for breakfast. And as long as he knows, then there shouldn't really be a problem, do you see? But he might say, do you know what? Recently there's been a lot of crimes happening, you know, in that area. I've heard of a lot of knife crime. I don't want you going out at this time. So in that situation, she can't say, oh, how dare you, you know, like, tell me I can't go out to get milk and, you know, get all triggered and stuff. At this point, she should have the understanding as well, isn't it? The wife say, oh, my husband's, he's even given a reasoning, like said, look, there's a lot of like problems happening right now. There's a lot of crime happening. Let's leave the milk and, you know, inshallah, you could get it tomorrow morning or something. Do you see? Then there has to be that understanding of why the husband is the leader of the family, and he has the right to, if he wants to protect his family, then he needs to know the whereabouts, naturally, isn't it? It's quite sort of rational if we think about it. So this is where that obedience comes in, isn't it? Like he knows that she knows that his job is to protect the family, so she then understands, okay, if this is a role, I have to therefore obey him, because, you know, he's just looking out for me at the end of the day. Do you see?
I think from that, I'm picturing this family dynamics, me needing milk at 8 p.m., you know, having to call the husband up, I need to go and get milk. But I'm seeing like a tranquility in that as well. Like if there's no milk in the morning, everyone's going to be suffering. There's no coffee, there's no tea, no one's getting their cereal. So you need to maintain that good communication as well within the family.
Yeah.
I know obedience obviously is key, and that's the whole point of this podcast today. But as I'm picturing this manicness at 8 p.m. in the dark, and you're having to worry about disobedience to the husband, do you need to seek permission or not? I guess the greater goal here is that peace, that tranquility, isn't it? Because no one's going to be happy if they're not getting their coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
What do you think of some of the barriers? So I think, I started off saying that it's like become like this very controversial sort of topic, isn't it, in society? And I think largely this is down to misunderstanding of what it actually means to obey the husband, firstly, i.e. I'm sure there's many women that probably think if you need to seek his permission every time, like to leave the house, that means you need to ask him every time you're stepping outside. I think people go to that extreme. But what do you think are some of the barriers beyond misunderstandings?
I think it's straight away having a problem with having that submission. So, for example, we grow up, we listen to our parents. If we're okay with that obedience, why is it a problem moving it over to this new man that we've married?
I'd say even like obeying your manager, like a lot of, men, women, everyone, like they will easily obey the manager. You could, like, say the manager says you can't leave, 5 to 5 to go, leave the office because your job finishes at 5. We'd just be like, okay, that's fine, right? But then all of a sudden when it's the husband, it's like, how dare he tell me that, I can't go out, whatever it is. You see, it just all of a
That
sudden.
stems down to the individual themselves
Yeah.
of why they have a problem with this husband of theirs giving them those orders.
But there is a difference between work and personal life. And I think maybe at work,
You're not going to
you-
get paid. You're gonna get
well,
sacked.
yeah, there's kind of consequences, yes, but also the general parameters have been laid out from well in advance. And now I know you're going to
I
probably
would
say the
argue,
parameters
yeah,
of the marriage,
that's what I said.
but I think the parameters, even if they're laid out, the problem is that it's not understood, isn't it?
So
Whereas
that's
in a
more the
job,
problem.
yeah,
so
it's not understood.
we need to educate ourselves on our role as in a when we get unfortunately I think people get married and they don't really think about, okay, what's my role as a wife, what's my role as a husband, what is my duty as a mother, and all these sort of things. It's just like, okay, I want to get married, the time is right, or whatever it is, or because of desires, and they just fall into marriage almost, right? And it's not really like thought out. But marriage, Islamically, is actually a transaction, which means just like if you're like having a contract of sale or something, you got to have the conditions of the sale, isn't it? Or even like if you're taking a job, you have the conditions of the job, right? Marriage is the same thing. There's roles, they're defined. You see, there's roles, responsibilities that are there.
And we have
There's
discussed
understanding
this,
there.
isn't it? We've
Yeah.
discussed this in the kind of other podcasts around feminism, women
That's
working
straight away
it.
what's
Yeah.
coming to my head.
But even in that discussion, some of the early podcasts, we kind of talked about why some women may not want to give up working, and it's that letting go. Yeah. So I think there's similar things going on with this, but I do think there's still a difference between work and personal life, because I think there's, from a psychological point of view, I think there's something going on sometimes about your identity. Yeah. And I think that is meshed in not being comfortable in your Muslim
From a personal point of
identity.
view, it's for myself. I'm happy to follow my husband's instructions. Early on, I'm talking about marriage. I've been married for 17 years, alhamdulillah. In the beginning, I listened to his instructions, but as soon as the word obey was thrown in, I used to be like, no, I don't obey you. Like, I don't know where that used to come from. And obviously, a lot of work, personal work, has helped me. That I'm like, yeah, okay, I obey my husband. What's wrong with that? Allah's provided that.
Yeah, I was going
ruling
to actually
on
mention,
him.
like, because you mentioned about consequences, like in work.
Yeah.
There's that, and you mentioned like identity and things like that. I agree. Again, it's having that Islamic identity. We have to embrace it, isn't it? Like, usually it's that we haven't fully embraced it, and unfortunately, there's so much like on social media, through like news and everything like that, where we're pushed that, okay, as a woman, you should be free and you shouldn't obey anyone, you shouldn't listen to anyone. But it's such a contradiction, isn't it? And unfortunately, we fall for that contradiction and we don't realize, okay, yeah, you obey your manager, yeah, you obey in your day-to-day life, you obey the rules of traffic and all this sort of stuff. There's so many things that you're obeying in, but all of a sudden when the husband is mentioned, you know, that trigger, it's like a trigger word, isn't it? And it becomes like what you're saying as well, that it becomes like it just sort of closes you off. And that's because we haven't engaged with our Islamic identity and fully understood the roles and the responsibilities in it. But I think one of the things is, you mentioned consequences, and what I wanted to say is that in our religion, there are consequences, right? Because as Muslims, we believe that we're here to obey Allah, first and foremost. So again,
Yeah.
obedience, our first and foremost obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. And Allah has asked us and commanded us to obey certain people in certain positions, right?
Yeah.
So like a child has to obey the parents, isn't it? The wife has to obey the husband. And there are consequences as well. We believe in consequences, that Allah tells us if you don't do certain things, that in the akhirah you're going to have to answer for it.
So that's
So-
why I mentioned kind of at the beginning that there is the kind of controversy of it comes from this. I think it stems from the fact that there's this idea or recognition that at times, historically and current day, women have suffered in worldly sense as a consequence of listening to their husband, and it's perceived that the husband, or not perceived, it probably is the case, that the husband, even if he's abused his position, in a worldly sense, it appears as though he's had a significant gain in abusing that authority almost, and abusing that right that he's been given. So going back to what you were saying, it links in with that. And I do think that there is still something about that, is that perception that the consequence in the worldly life, which is, you know, the one that we're living at the moment, so it does feel, it does hit you more in some sense, and it's harder to keep yourself reminded of the akhirah sometimes when you're faced with challenges.
Coming back to what
Yeah.
Shumi said about being
Yeah.
Jannah orientated.
Yeah.
So this is something that both husband and wife, they both have to be Jannah
Yeah.
orientated. And unfortunately, again, it comes down to, like, when you get married, you want to look for someone that sort of embodies that as well, isn't it? Like, you want to look for someone who is Jannah orientated, and you want to make sure, going off on a bit of a side topic, that
Yeah.
even when you're getting married, like really researching and understanding who you're married and your own goals, isn't it, in getting married. Unfortunately, again, the case is that sort of the Jannah, being Jannah orientated, looking for taqwa and all these things are not the priority,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it? It's the having the house and having the car and having the degree. And sometimes you have to give up worldly things, like you're saying, for akhirah. Maybe not always, but in many
Yeah,
cases, I
sometimes
think
you
that
do,
you,
yeah.
you will have to. And unfortunately, I see not all sisters are willing to do that. They'd rather have the dunyawi thing, do you see, the worldly house and the car, rather than thinking, okay, is he really...
I think it's become a dated thing.
Yeah.
That's what it is. What was you going to
What I'm hearing is, obviously, before you're getting married, look into all of these things. But,
Yeah.
you know, obviously, a lot of us weren't practicing before we
Yeah.
got married. So, you know, you're in a marriage 5-10 years and, you know, suddenly you realize, oh, actually, I do have to obey my husband. What do I do about that? But I think ultimately, when let's not put Islam aside, but looking at your relationship with your spouse and thinking, what is it about him that I am so triggered that I can't follow those instructions? Or why is it that it becomes a battle when he's giving me those instructions? What's going on for me?
But do you think that's about the relationship? Because I would say the bigger thing to ask is, what is it that's going on? Why are you triggered by the commands of Allah? Because you can change the man and the ruling would still be the same, right? And if you still have a problem with it, then the issue is your
But for the
understanding of
sisters-
it or your acceptance of it.
For the sisters, and obviously we've had our mother's clients and we've worked on different kind of projects as well that we know different people have gone through separation and stuff. It's actually about the getting one over each other. It's all of that's happening. I know what you're saying. So actually they're being disobedient to Allah first and foremost when they're not being obedient to the husband. You just said.
Yeah, so if we, I know that again this is slightly going off topic, but you know, a husband have been allowed to have more than one wife. The majority of women, if not all women, will have some emotions about that. It's not something that sits comfortably. It's not something that's easy. It's not something that I would ever want to find myself in either. But in that, the uncomfortableness, that's a right that's given to them. It's nothing to do with the man. It's got to, but there's a point that maybe we feel, in all of our years of thinking about that, we swallow it and think, this is something that Allah has ordained, but inshallah I never have to find myself in that situation and pray on it, But there's an uncomfortableness in accepting it, but we accept it nonetheless. And maybe it's easier to accept because none of us are in that situation. But what I'm relating to this of obeying the husband is, I think sometimes it is the husband. Yes, there's dynamics that are happening within the family home. And if you are triggering each other, then quite frankly, yes, it's going to be a lot harder for a woman to obey her husband because you're more interested in getting one up on each other. But if things are relatively okay and you've still got an issue with it, there's something deeper going on there, isn't it? And I think largely there is something deeper going on, which is there's an uncomfortableness in obeying a husband. And I do think some of that's down to a misconception of what it means to obey your husband. I really think from the subcontinent, there's also been this real bashing of that to the point that women were, our mother's generation probably suffered quite a lot as a consequence of that. And perhaps our generation have seen it, I don't know. And so you're kind of triggered by that and you think it's an outdated thing. Also, the fact that we grew up in this society has had an effect, right? Am I making sense?
I think a lot of it comes down to, and I think Shumi touched upon it, is, like when you're having that sort of the conflict or whatever it is that's bringing this out, a lot of like self-work has to be done because at the end of the day, yes, there's so much like context and background of why this can be happening. But regardless of that, what we're trying to get out of the marriage is to have a healthy marital relationship. So forget all the baggage, come back to your asal, come back to your religion, come back to what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want from you. Do you see? That's what we have to be coming to. And unfortunately, when you're like constantly looking at the baggage and looking at the traumas and, how do you get triggered and things like that, then you will be triggered. You will see the negatives. But we want to be of those who look at like healthy marriage as something that is actually a happy marriage and, that is, devoid of like these triggers and stuff like that. Do you see? And we're doing it for the sake of Allah because as is mentioned in the hadith, the one who obeys, like prays her 5 prayers, fasts in Ramadan, etc., and obeys her husband, in the hadith is mentioned, she can enter paradise from whichever gate she wishes. This is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, this shows us, like usually for anything you think of, any action that is difficult to do usually has one of the biggest rewards.
Self-sacrificing, I think, when there's self-sacrifice.
Exactly. So here is again, sometimes, usually everything's okay when things are going the way you want them to. But where the sabr and, that hardship comes is when it's not always going the way you want it. And in life, unfortunately, thus is the dunya, isn't it? We're not in Jannah. In Jannah, you can have whatever you want and be happy, and it's your rules. You see, you've done the hard work in the dunya. So really, I think it's about working towards a healthy relationship, and that requires working on yourself. It's so easy to point the finger at the other person. When you're in a marriage, in your friendship, when it's with your parents, usually what we find as human beings, we point fingers at other people. But really what we need to do is sit down and take that time and like really look at ourselves and say, when that situation happened, okay, yes, maybe the husband didn't do the best way of doing things. Let's forget him for a second because our conversation is not about him. It's about us and thinking, okay, how did I react in that situation? Why was I so triggered? Why did I start swearing or shouting or whatever it is that you did? You see, and think, okay, what am I meant to really be doing as a Muslim wife and aspiring for that, isn't it? That's what healthy relationships are about, leaving everything behind and working towards what's going to make the marriage better. And I think that's where the reward is really with, being in the marriage and obeying your husband. And I think we have to keep coming back to that because society is going to push us. And as things are going, the way that society is pushing, becoming more individualistic and more sort of nafsi about the self, it's pushing us to become like that and say, well, it doesn't agree with how I'm feeling right now, so I don't want to do that. You see, but in marriage, it's about you're in a partnership. Sometimes things are gonna go your way, and things are in other times gonna go his way. Do you see? It's about accepting that and having the sabr when it's needed, and thinking, well, through this is my Jannah, really, isn't it?
You know, you were mentioning that, and it's the same for me, that we didn't really get married with that full understanding. But along the way, and I think that's probably most marriages, right? You don't really understand this stuff. You're not having all the right conversations. You're not really searching for all the right things. But it doesn't mean to say it's all doom and gloom for the rest of your marriage, because there can come a point that you both become more aware of this, become more knowledgeable, and then you try and implement it the best you can. How did you find then accepting, so going from being triggered by obeying him, or that word even coming up, to suddenly being able to get over that?
It's
How did that
definitely down to education, understanding. So it goes back to what you were saying about understanding this is a ruling from Allah first and foremost. So going back to the foundations of everything, okay, I obey Allah by praying, I obey Allah by fasting. So Allah's given me this commandment that I have to listen, obey my husband as well when he's giving me these regulations. So why am I triggered? So then it's like when I have clients and stuff come to me, it's working on, like Mufti Nasima was saying, working on yourself. So if a sister was to come to me and say to me, oh, you know, my husband's not letting me go out or something, I don't know, I wouldn't be focusing on the problem. Like, I don't know, he's saying no to her going out at midnight. That's dangerous, whatever. I wouldn't be focusing on that. I'd focus on what's going on for her at the time, what's her emotions, what is the need for her to be going at that time. You know, there's going to be a lot more under the surface than the husband saying no to going out at midnight, which we know is dangerous, and, you know, I wouldn't advise it personally. But I find the more I start talking to sisters about the underlying issues behind it, maybe she hasn't been out the whole day.
Yeah.
And suddenly he's come home from, I don't know, work or whatever, and the kids are in bed, food's made and everything. And again, I'm saying, I know it's not safe, but maybe it's just that she needs to get out.
There's a reason in that moment that she's seeking something.
Giving her that validation at the time to understand it. Not saying, go out, you know. But understanding that helps. And for myself personally as well, understand that actually obeying the husband isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
But you need to validate yourself first to understand why initially it was a problem. So let's say he was to say, I can't go and see my mum on Saturday for whatever reason. Oh my God, big heart attack. My whole family's getting together on Saturday and I can't see my parents. Focusing back to what was the need of me to see. Is it my parents, or is it because my sisters are getting together and I'm going to miss out on the fun there? And then focusing on what is his reason for telling me. And again, he might not have any reason whatsoever. He might just want us at home on Saturday because he's got the day off and he wants his wife and kids at home that day. Is there anything wrong in that? But don't become vengeful about it. Like, oh, he's taken away my right to have fun at my mum's house. Try and focus on the love and connection in your marriage. And don't always make it a negative. Try and look at the positive of things.
That, I think what you said about, focus on the love and the connection. Like, if you're in a sort of normal, healthy, happy marriage, that's what should be the priority, isn't it? You should be thinking that actually my husband wants the best for me at the end of the day. So, like, certain things that maybe he asks of you, and there's like, obviously, we're discussing the going out bit or whatever, the permission, but there's so many things that are part of the obedience, isn't it? But at the end of the day, as the leader of the family, he has to make sure the family is functioning, isn't it? And that the family is one that, has the love and everything like that. But at the same time, that he is answerable. More than us, isn't it?
Yes.
He's answerable. So there's certain things that he might actually, like, sort of pull us up on, because part of that is just like your manager, coming to the work example, just like your manager at work, if you're not doing certain things that are required of you in the marriage, the manager will, in the job, the manager will be like, hold on a second, you haven't done that yet, and it's been this many days, and you would be expected to apologize and say, I'm sorry, I'm going to get it done by tomorrow at 5 p.m. or whatever, isn't it? Because it's part of your job. So similarly with the husband, yes, if he really wants to do, he could just let you just do whatever, isn't it? But he's accountable, and he has to make sure that the family is running the way it's meant to be.
Yeah.
And that, like, say, if you've got children, that, again, the children are an amana responsibility as well, that the family is going towards Allah, isn't it, rather than going away. Otherwise, yeah, maybe he's happy, for you to just leave the house in the mess, not take care of the children and all that sort of stuff, isn't it? But really, he has to make sure the family is functioning. And ultimately, because we said about the tranquility there, he has to make sure the tranquility is existing in the marriage, isn't it?
So I want to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say. So with the extreme situations where there has been, or where there may well still be, women who, they are obeying their husband and he is completely abusing his authority in that situation. There may be women that, who are experiencing that, listening to this, and I think, would it be fair to, what would be the advice that you would give in that situation? My personal view would be, in that situation, if there is someone that's, if you are not wanting to obey your husband because you fear that he's going to abuse you because of that, then then you need to seek some sort of support around that, and go and speak to someone and think about, if it's an abusive relationship, then obviously, take the routes that are available to you, because Islam promotes that, right?
I think it's important to sort of separate an abusive relationship, because sometimes people think when we're talking about, obeying the husband and, there's like abuse or some sort of problem. We're talking about a normal, healthy marriage, a healthy relationship where your aim is to make each other happy, you love each other and you want to do the best by each other. In these situations, obviously, of course, if you're in an abusive situation, there's a way out. You need to go and seek support and help. But in a normal marriage, our religion provides our guidance. That's actually our center point. And both spouses should be using that as, their guiding light, to improve the marriage.
It's the default. It's again a term that I've used on other podcasts. Islam is about the default position and then the rulings for the exception, isn't it? And I think that that can be applied.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, the exception is being used to kind of stop the default position.
Yeah, even like when you're thinking about, like the need for fiqh in terms of like, okay, what's the ruling about this? What's the right of the husband? What's the right of the wife? Again, these rulings come in because when the relationship is devoid of love, isn't it? And that mercy, and otherwise between yourselves you should be able to work things out and say, okay, we both love each other, we both want to attain Jannah. How can we make this relationship work for the sake of Allah, isn't it? That's really how things should be working.
And marriage is not easy, so let's be honest. Marriage, anyone that's been married for a number of years would have experienced good times and bad times, and then there's kind of, Allah says he'll test you with something of, different sorts of loss. That's how we're tested. So during those points where you're being tested, it becomes hard because you're strained. But by and large, I think most people are in marriages and you got married because you wanted something good, something happy, something enjoyable, some sort of comfort in the other person. A partnership, yeah.
It's not just you, yourself, and I. It's a partnership.
And companionship, companion.
Otherwise, obviously, don't get married, isn't it? If you don't want to obey a husband, then the choice is to not get married, first of all.
I love that.
Otherwise, if you're in that position and you're a believer, you're here for the sake of Allah to worship Him and please Him, then that has to be your anchor point, isn't it? So it means that, okay, right now, maybe I struggle with certain things and everyone struggles with different things. There's sisters struggling to pray, there's sisters struggling with hijab, or so many things, right? So this is just another thing that is a duty, and Allah has made an obligation. And we have to think, well, I'm struggling with this, but I want to go to Jannah. I want to please Allah. I want to see Allah in Jannah, and I want to have His rewards. How can I do that? How can I achieve that? And that means you're going to have to work on yourself. It's not going to come easy, isn't it? It's not just going to be like, here you go, that's it. You suddenly know how to obey your husband and follow the things that Allah has given him rights in. Is you have to work at it. You see, that's naturally going to happen. And as human beings, we have that enoughs, isn't it? So there'll be times when our pride, our ego will get in the way of certain things. Other times, just our human nature, maybe it's laziness or whatever, and things like that. You know, I'm just thinking about like another thing which you know, we have to obey our husband in is like intimacy, for example. So a lot of the excuses about, okay, I'm tired, or I've been dealing with the kids, and you see all that sort of stuff. But sometimes to make the relationship work, both people need different things as well, isn't it? And it's, you know, sometimes making an effort, even if you're feeling lazy or whatever, it's like fighting your nafs, isn't it? That's what really the marriage, the relationship is about. So bringing in like different areas of like the marital relationship. Again, if it's Jannah orientated, it's going to mean making the
That
effort
you're-
towards
yeah,
it. Do you
yeah,
see?
you'll just-
Making effort, and sometimes having to fight your nafs and what your nafs is saying. Do you see? To think, because at the end of the day, relationships need work. Yeah, and they can't be one-sided as well. They can't just be like only the wife working towards it or only the husband working towards it. They both have to meet each other in different places in the relationship.
Any final thoughts? We're coming towards the end.
I would say if you are struggling with this, first and foremost, get the support. So whether it's through Islamic counselling, you know, Al-Madad Outreach, obviously, we've got the Islamic counselling and the pastoral care side of things. And it's not something that you can fix overnight. You know, we've got years and years and years of hurt and trauma that is bubbling up inside. And if you have been in a marriage for a very long time and these things have been bubbling up and, you know, you have been disobedient in your marriage, get it sorted now. It's going to hurt. Getting, you know, working on yourself, it's not, like you said, it's not an overnight thing. Or you might be obedient for a couple of days and then, oh, suddenly, oh no, why is he telling me what to do suddenly? All of that, work on yourself, you know, and give yourself the space to feel the emotions at the time. Because there are things that are going to come up from childhood, from your teens, from early marriage, you know, even within, there's going to be so much coming up.
There's almost multiple things to kind of explore, isn't there? There's multiple relationships that you have to take to get to that optimum kind of level. And I think first and foremost is your relationship with Allah, then it's your relationship with yourself, and then it's a relationship with your spouse. And I think when in that order, because without the relationship with Allah, you're not gonna.
And yourself too.
Yeah, and
the other
yourself, yeah.
relationships are going
You
to suffer.
learn to love yourself, that will bring the tranquility in the family more.
Yeah.
The husband will learn to love you.
Yeah.
We often don't know how to love ourselves. So then we've got this barrier put up as well.
But you know, because I know we both like psychological theories, and so we kind of go back to this. But you know, Maslow's hierarchy of need, that it was modified, wasn't it, from the first hierarchy of need to the latter one that came out some years later, which the top of the pyramid became transcendence, which is serving others and basically self-sacrifice. And I think that's really interesting that it changed to modify that, because it was basically self-actualizing was the initial top of the pyramid, which is you are at the peak of who you can be and serving yourself almost, isn't it? Whereas transcendence was about you get to a point where you no longer are focused on fulfilling your needs. You've got to a point where you're more focused on wider society and serving the community and the betterment of human race and this world. And you don't need to go through all of the pyramid to get to that point. You can be at the bottom of the barrel, the bottom of the pyramid, and having that met and still be at transcendence. You don't need to go through all of it to get to that. Originally, it was that you needed to kind of go through all of it to get to self-actualizing, which I think is similar to what we're discussing, that actually, but I would say you need to work on your relationship with Allah to get to the point where you can then actually look at yourself. And, you know, it's not easy. And sometimes I think we forget the power of making dua and saying, I don't know how to look at myself. I don't know how to fix this. Allah help me. And there's a dua that I learned about a year ago, and it's been a lifesaver for me, is Allahumma khilli wa akhtarli, which means, Ya Allah, grant me choice and choose for me. And I think that's a very, very powerful choice. It's almost like a mini istikhara to give you choice in multiple things that you do in a day.
It's interesting because when you said about the transcendence, I'm reminded of how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, because Maslow's hierarchy of needs mentioned is like the basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter, etc. But if we look at our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was times he didn't have food, and you'll think like he didn't have basic necessities. Yeah, but look at him. You know, he's the best
he was
of
transcendent
serving.
about, yeah.
Exactly. So it shows that that is possible, that you can transcend and go beyond, even if you don't have that. And we can actually empower ourselves by understanding that and see that it's possible for all of us to do that. One thing I wanted to actually say, because I know we're coming to the end as well, is, you know, our sort of generation and, you know, the generation younger than us as well, we have a responsibility to show what healthy marriages look like, because we have our younger generations, our children's generations as well. They're growing up in a time, unfortunately, where divorce in the Muslim community is on the rise. There are so many people that are divorced or in like broken marriages and things like that. And we need to show them, okay, despite all these things, and yeah, okay, divorce is something that is acceptable, and you know, we know that is permissible in Islam. But despite that, understanding what is a healthy marriage. Because our Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was a married man, and he showed us that this is actually, you know, like the optimal to get married. And for us, as like in this generation now, we need to show what does that look like as a good, healthy marriage, rather than speaking about, you know, like where we see like social media and all that. And obviously, everyone's following social media is showing us what a traumatic relationship looks like, or what a broken marriage looks like. We need to sort of show what do healthy marriages look like for the sake of society at large and for our children and the next generation that are coming. Because otherwise, if we're broken, what is there for our next generations that are coming?
That shows maybe from our mom's generation, when our parents, when our mothers were obedient, they maybe weren't happy about it. So they were quite depressed and sad. But if we're showing the positivity in the obeying,
because of understanding the basis for it, isn't
it? Our children will see
it's
it.
partly understanding the basis of it, but also for our mother's generation. I know I don't want to open up another wide conversation because we're already over our time. But for our mother's generation, you know, the reality is, while they were obedient, they didn't have anything else in their life but their children and husband. So there was no outlet for them. There was nothing, you know, they didn't have little courses that they could attend and things like that. There's nothing more to the relationship between the husband and the children. And so sometimes, you know, we've discussed this multiple times. There's a whole reason why we set up the youth club, the Mother and Daughters Youth Club, for the girls, but also for the mothers. The whole reason that you set up the Mahran Women's Centre is for women to have a place away from the husband and the children, to have an identity of herself, to be herself without being the carer, you know. So our mothers didn't have that in the same way.
I say that again. That again, that comes to understanding, you know, like the different spheres of being a Muslim woman, isn't it? Or without, say, our mums, they didn't understand that, isn't it? It was just, okay, I'm married, this is my job, but that's it. And even the foundation of why they're doing all these things, it was just, oh, this is what's expected of you, and that's what you're meant to do. Whereas now, you know, we're trying to understand, okay, what are our different spheres as Muslims, isn't it? It's not only as a mother and only as a wife, and that's it. We have other spheres where, first and foremost, servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, we have to seek knowledge. We have a responsibility to help our community, and all these things, these all come together. And this is where, like, the YSC, the youth centre, comes in as well, where we try and incorporate these different aspects of us, and understanding that, you know.
Maybe it looked different though. Maybe they did understand in some way, because, you know, all of us have spoken about mothers of that generation would have like 50 people rock up at the door, and they would be in the kitchen cooking to serve them. So servitude in that era perhaps looked different. It's not the same thing that it was here, and maybe they needed more of this, but circumstances just, I suppose, they were new to the country. They didn't have those same services, and each generation adds on more. So we're hoping our children will add more. Final comment, because I can see you're about to say something.
Do you know what? It's going to open up more. I'm going to stop because I know it's quite late and it's like iftar time and everything.
So I think we'll end it there. Thank you to you both. Jazakumullah khair for listening to our podcast. Please like, share and follow. Please leave some comments, and for sisters out there, go and learn about what obeying your husband means. And for anyone that is in a particularly difficult situation, please contact Al Madad, which is a service that we provide where we offer mediation. There's also listening lives, which is confidential. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuhu.